This is Learning with Coach History. This is the fifth lesson in the Cold War, Mounting Tensions in the 60s. Vocab, John F. Kennedy, Flexible Response, Domino Theory, Lyndon B. Johnson, Fidel Castro, Berlin Wall, Hotline, Limited Test Ban Treaty, and Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Improvements in the space program were supported by President John F. Kennedy. He thought the Soviets were ahead of the United States in technological developments. He also believed that they had the loyalties of economically less developed third world countries in Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Beginning in 1961, Kennedy focused on foreign affairs. He supported a policy called flexible response. This policy called for the use of conventional weapons rather than nuclear weapons in the event of a war. Conventional weapons included jets, tanks, missiles, and guns. To build more conventional weapons, Kennedy increased defense spending. He hoped that this would reduce the risk of nuclear war. The developing conflict in Vietnam threatened to lead to war. This conflict had been continuing for more than a decade. Vietnam was divided. A communist government was in power in the north, and a democratically elected government controlled the south. Kennedy wanted to stop any further spread of communism in Southeast Asia. His policy was based on the domino theory, the theory that says that one country falling to communist influence will quickly lead to another country's in the same area falling as well. After Kennedy's death, Lyndon B. Johnson became president and continued Kennedy's policies. He too was determined to contain communism in Vietnam and ended up sending U.S. soldiers there. President Kennedy faced a communist government closer to the United States in Cuba. Cuba's leader was Fidel Castro. Castro had seized power in 1959. Soon after that, he declared himself a communist. He then formed ties with the Soviet Union. The United States was weary of Castro, but it did recognize Cuba's government. However, Castro seized 3 American and British oil refineries, and relations worsened. Castro also broke up commercial farms into communes to be worked by peasants. American sugar companies controlled this cropland, so the United States established trade barriers against Cuban sugar. Castro used Soviet aid and political repression to put his reforms into place. Many Cubans went into exile and came to the United States. American leaders were afraid of a communist government so close to the United States. Kennedy approved a plan to remove Castro from power. The plan called for Cuban exiles to invade Cuba and overthrow Castro. The U.S. government would supply air support for the exiles. This attack failed. Many exiles were captured. The failed invasion became known as the Bay of Pigs. It left the Kennedy administration greatly embarrassed. A year later, the United States and Cuba clashed again. Pictures from U.S. spy planes revealed that the Soviets were building nuclear missile bases in Cuba. Some bases already contained missiles ready to launch. These weapons could be aimed at the United States. President Kennedy demanded that the Soviets remove the missiles. In October of 1962, he surrounded Cuba with U.S. Navy ships. These ships forced Soviet vessels trying to reach Cuba to turn around. A tense standoff followed. It appeared that war might break out. However, Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev, finally agreed to remove the missiles. This standoff, which became known as the Cuban Missile Crisis, damaged Khrushchev's prestige in the Soviet Union and the world. Kennedy also endured criticism. Some Americans thought Kennedy had acted too boldly and nearly started a nuclear war. Others claimed he hadn't acted boldly enough. These critics believed that Kennedy should have invaded Cuba and ousted Castro. In 1961, Kennedy faced a growing problem in Berlin. The city was still divided. East Berlin was under communist control. West Berlin was under the control of Great Britain, France, and the United States. By 1961, almost 3 million East Germans had fled into West Berlin. Khrushchev threatened to sign a treaty with East Germany that would block all air and land routes into West Berlin. Kennedy warned the Soviet leader against such actions. As a result, Khrushchev changed his plan. Instead, he built a large concrete barrier along the border between East and West Berlin. It was known as the Berlin Wall. It prevented any more East Germans from fleeing to West Berlin. The construction of the Berlin Wall heightened Cold War tensions and became a symbol of communist oppression. Despite their battles, Kennedy and Khrushchev did attempt to reach agreements. They established a hotline between their two nations. This special telephone hookup connected Kennedy and Khrushchev. It allowed them to talk directly when a crisis arose. The two leaders also agreed to a limited test ban treaty. This treaty barred nuclear testing in the atmosphere. By the late 1960s, the world feared nuclear catastrophe. The United Kingdom, France, and China also had tested nuclear weapons. Some world leaders feared what would happen as developing nations developed weapons too. So world leaders agreed to try to limit the spread of nuclear weapons. Representatives from more than 60 countries signed the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. Nuclear powers agreed not to sell or give nuclear weapons to any other country. Non-nuclear powers promised not to acquire such weapons. In the 1950s, the Soviets had launched the first artificial satellite. Americans did the same shortly after. Then in 1961, the Soviets launched a person into orbit around the Earth. President Kennedy felt this was a challenge, so he pledged that the nation would put a man on the moon by the end of the decade. First, however, the United States successfully launched a man, Alan Shepard, into space. Then America's National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, constructed facilities to aid space exploration. And on July 20th, 1969, astronaut Neil Armstrong stepped onto the moon. The United States had surpassed the Soviets.